Hello, everybody. My name is Ben Reynolds. I'm founder and director of Urban Foundry. We're based in Swansea, 20 years old this year. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about some of the work we're doing around pop-ups, meanwhile spaces across Wales. I just have to get a plug in at the beginning because the logo police will be on me if I don't, is that actually a lot of this work, although it's not funded directly to us, it is paid for its source by UK government through the Levelling Up funding via SPF. And so just to give the plug and the credit in there early on. So the pop-up spaces arise from our broader work in urban regeneration. So very broadly, what we do is we take a mixture of creative thinking, a theoretical understanding about how and why towns and cities work the way they do, and also a kind of a very pragmatic, socially entrepreneurial approach that we don't just write hypothetical reports about it. We actually do projects in places to try and actually enact that regeneration. And what that takes the form of is sort of four broad areas. One is around stakeholder engagement. One is around what I broadly call viability support, which is kind of how are we going to make this work? How are we going to make it financially wash its face? How are we going to finance it? But also, how is it going to be socially sustainable as well as environmentally sustainable? The third area is what everybody thinks regeneration is, which is part of it, which is the bricks and mortar stuff, which is kind of the more sort of physical placemaking things, from pop-up events through to urban design, through to kind of building projects. And then the fourth area there in the bottom right there is working, that was the Wellbeing Future Generations Commissioner's Office. It's just before Christmas. We do a lot of work around impact evaluation, which is articulating what it is you're trying to achieve, what it is you want to change, and what you do. And what's slightly different about us with some of the others in our field, as well as doing that for other people, we do it for ourselves. And one of the things that we started to do for ourselves is set up pop-up projects in empty spaces. And we've been doing that for about 20 years, doing the odd project here and there where we just thought it's a nice idea, let's do it. What's happened in the last 5 or 6 years is other people have seen that we're doing that for ourselves and said, that looks really interesting. Can you come and create something that's a bit more structured and a bit more broad and actually sort of adopt this as an approach? And so we're now into that sort of kind of post-COVID era where we've now got projects where we've got lots of spaces empty. Contrary to popular belief, retail was declining anyway pre-COVID. Where we're at now, we probably would have been at in 5-10 years anyway. It's just that COVID pressed fast forward and we weren't ready for it. The other thing to say is that a lot of smaller town centres and some of the better district centres, if they were doing well before COVID, actually a lot of them are actually doing all right now. They might not be as high end as we want them to. It might not be paying the rents we want them to, but actually the vacancy rates in a lot of them aren't actually that bad. The places that have really suffered the biggest casualties of COVID were the nationals, the multiples. And what they were doing was two things. One was they were occupying often bigger spaces, so it's much more obvious if they've gone. You maybe don't notice maybe that sort of 6 metre wide shopping unit empty in the middle of a parade. If it's not in too bad a condition, you do notice the empty Debenhams because it's massive. And the other thing was that they inflated property values for a long time. They were the only show in town and they were the ones who were pushing up all the prices. And now that they've gone, the prices haven't necessarily dropped everywhere. Again, contrary to popular belief, plenty of demand, but a lot of that demand's coming from independents. So what we did was create something called Pop-Up Wales. And what we sought to do was this a bit like kind of the, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Giuliani or Bloomberg, no broken windows in New York. And sort of our thing was, well, we should start thinking about a no empty shops. I will get in now, we're nowhere near no empty shops. What we're trying to do is that this is the foothills of getting to there and a sort of a trial of an approach. And what we're trying to achieve with it on the left-hand side there really is kind of 5 core outcomes. One is about if you do this and do it well, and we've done 60 odd of these now across South Wales, we know that they can increase footfall. It may not be that footfall isn't just about the space itself. It's about driving footfall to the stuff that's around it. We know that they can improve dwell time. So once we've got people coming in, that they stay longer, hopefully, and therefore hopefully spend more. But the big one for me that I really feel like these pop-ups do is that softer one, but actually it's about perceptions. It's about not having places boarded up. It's about having activity. It's about having the lights on. And it's often the less sexy one that funders like, but actually it's probably the biggest impact that this sort of approach makes. Is a confidence thing, both for investors, for consumers, but for other people who are there as well. It's sort of that rising tide floats all boats. And of course, through doing it, you're creating opportunities for people to then take those spaces and try an idea, try a project, try a business, whatever it might be. But the other thing we found through doing it is that about 80 or 90% of the ones we've done now, and we're 63, I think we're on at the moment, round about 80 to 85% of them go to commercial long-term let. Now, you've got no way of knowing that they might have done that anyway if you hadn't done a pop-up, but the fact that it's very high and that other places have done that shows that, it's the kind of paint the whole thing Magnolia effect if you're trying to sell your house. it's kind of that thing of if people can psychologically sort of see that the space is in use, there's people in there, it's making money, doing whatever, then it kind of seems to make it more likely that it goes for long-term commercial let. So how it works, the landlord, the benefits for the landlord, they get to keep the space on the market. We're just doing temporary things so they can keep it on with their estate agent, whatever. While it's in meanwhile use, pop-up use, we're keeping it warm, secure, maintained for them, so it's not deteriorating. They're saving on empty business rates, which in some places can be quite significant. They're also saving on utility standing charges, which if any of you own properties, you'll know have been fairly eye-watering over the last year, even if you don't flick a light switch on. And then, as I said, with that other one, that we're finding that it's actually more lettable in a commercial sense in the long run. Not necessarily to the person you put in as a pop-up, though it might be. It might go to somebody else afterwards, but the fact is it's going for commercial let. And how that works is what we've created is a kind of what are the barriers? Having done these for ourselves, how are we going to make this easy for other people? So the first thing we did was we created a kind of fill in the blanks meanwhile lease. Because if you're only going into a space for 3 months, even if you've got a really commercially viable product, there's a good chance you're not going to make back enough money to cover your costs and all of your upfront costs of going in, one of which might be 1,200, 1,500 quid, maybe 2 grand's worth of legal fees. So we created, maybe not eliminating legals, but to try and get the cost down, we created like a fill in the blanks meanwhile lease, which we've tried and tested and we've tweaked over time to what normally happens if you're leasing a space is the landlord gives you theirs from their solicitor, you give it to your solicitor, you haggle and you try and meet somewhere in the middle. What we did was commissioned a solicitor to say, start in the middle and try and create something that gives a reasonable degree of protection to the person who's going in as a pop-up. So the landlord can't waltz in every minute if they want to, but equally so understanding this is just a filler and the landlord's got to be able to show people around and keep it on the market. They're all done on easy and easy out terms. It's haggled on a basic project by project basis. We normally start on the basis of 3 months followed by a 6-week rolling break after that, tenant only. And they're done on usually on peppercorn rents. We are finding that some just don't want to do that. They will not do it without you paying them something, but generally we start on the basis of they're done on a peppercorn rent. The occupant then, whoever the end user is, they're responsible for the business rates and utilities, and if there is a bid in the area, they would also pay the bid levy. The landlord insures the building. That's usually in the landlord's interest because often the people doing this are very small and the landlord knows that, if the building were to burn down, they know that it's definitely covered for rebuild costs. The landlord can, if they want to, pass that on through an insurance rent. We generally sort of say, look, you're making a big saving here, so you keep it insured. But the occupant then insures all their activities. They insure their equipment. They insure for public liability, employee liability. So it's kind of a no-brainer for landlords. It's very risky, it's risk-free. If anything is longer than 6 months, we get them to opt out of the Landlord Tenant Act, so they know they're covered for that. And generally, when we put end users in, they're usually in on a license, so it's not even a lease usually. So the model we normally take is we take a lease. We've got a non-profit vehicle which takes the lease on the space and it sub-licenses to the end user. If we have got somebody who's a bit bigger, a bit more stable, they sometimes will do a direct deal with the landlord directly, and we just act as a broker. But there's a way of doing it. But either way, the landlord's protected. But the other area then that we've sort of found that was a big barrier was that a lot of what's sitting empty is in really poor condition. And again, you might have an amazing product to go in, but actually you're not going to make the money back on capital works in 3 months. Now, you might be there for 2 years. There's nothing to say the lease itself could be 5 years if you want to. It's the break point in the lease is the important thing. And that's usually that 3 months followed by rolling 6 weeks. The initial 3 months, by the way, is to allow us enough time to do works on the property and still do something with it in case somebody gives us notice on day one. And so what we've done is with the bulk of the budgets we've had out of place is to have a budget for compliance works. And effectively that's to make it safe to go in. So it's usually the electrics, and virtually every premises we're taking on now, the electrics have to be condemned because the regulations have changed. And so actually you're rewiring it. If there's gas in there, you're checking the gas boiler's fine. You're testing the water. If it's been empty for 2 years, so if you drink it, it's not going to kill you. It's, maybe changing the locks, repairing glazing, and sort of basic cosmetics, carpentry, painting, bit of signage, that type of stuff. So essentially you can go in, we white box it, and off you go. So that's basically the concept of how it works, and I'll just whip through for the last 5 minutes just some examples of some of the spaces we've done. So this is one of the first ones we did. It was a big old empty nightclub in Swansea, so before and after, left and right. So inside at the top left, it was a big empty nightclub. We put a load of street food traders in there. This is going back about 7-8 years ago now, and we put some live music in. We ran a pop-up bar in there, which is how we paid for the space. It's a bit like a version of what is now places like Founders and Co and things like that. They've done it on a budget, but it was kind of a sawdust on the floor version of that. And then you can see a lovely bit of 90s architecture there in the bottom left. And that sort of prompted the landlord to do kind of a bit of a funky paint job on the outside and bring a bit of life to the street and just make it a bit more interesting. This is another one we did in Swansea, which was an old empty cafe, again, before and after, left and right. So it was in the ownership of the university. They won't mind me saying this. It got very universityified. You know, everything was different shades of grey. And it had been empty for a long time. And on the right-hand side is what we did with it, which is a bit of a paint job, bit of wood, you know, kind of some reclaimed furniture. And that's now permanent. That's where I'm actually sitting talking to you from now, in the meeting room next to it. That's now a permanent, that's a social enterprise cafe in Swansea. Other types of users then, so arts users are very good at pop-ups. So they're really good at kind of working with no money, doing things really fast. So the top left one there was in the shopping mall in Swansea. The rateable value on that was colossal. So even if we did put an end user, it used to be the Disney store, so that tells you who could afford the rates in it. We couldn't put anybody selling stuff in there because even if we made it rent-free, the rates they would still have to pay on it were eye-watering. And so we put an art gallery in it and a non-profit use, which qualified for rate relief, which meant that we could bring life to it at low cost. And we did that with a variety of users. There's students doing their end-of-year show, which is the picture that's there, but it was community groups. But we made it white box, worked really well. Top right, you often find a lot of those. That was kind of, you know, built on spec, never filled. You can see the breeze block walls were still there in the background. We did that with the university, their science department, their physics department. We did a sort of a pop-up science gallery around the theme of time. So we had a DeLorean from Back to the Future and Doctor Who's TARDIS and various other things. But in the back was all their experiments and their kind of community outreach. Bottom left was a sort of art talk space, and bottom right is your sort of typical white box art gallery type pop-up. The third sector of the other ones were really good at doing stuff thriftily, fast, at low cost. So we've set up a few of these, and these are brilliant footfall drivers. Individually, they don't make money themselves very much because they're all on grant funding, but they're brilliant footfall drivers for the stuff that's around them. So top left is an anxiety hub, which is one of the more recent ones we've done. Top right was a library of things that we set up in Swansea, hugely successful. Bottom left, we worked with the job centre, and they were finding there was a stigma for a lot of people who didn't want any benefits. They just wanted a job, but they wouldn't go in the job centre because the stigma of kind of, well, I'm not one of those people, I just want a job. So what we did was split off the I'm looking for a job function from the benefits bit, and it completely revolutionised their service. And we put the I'm looking for a job bit in a pop-up, and that worked brilliantly. And the one that's probably been the most successful is the Dementia Hub we set up with a third sector charity, because of course the people go into that are not the people with dementia, they're the people who are caring for the people with dementia. And they're probably people around about my age, a little bit older, they've got disposable income, they go in for a coffee next door, they're buying that birthday present while they're there, and it's a brilliant footfall driver. They can be for businesses too. Top left is the one that stereotypically people think pop-up shops are, which is like your stereotypical pop-up Christmas shop, which of course you can do. But the top right, we're not purist about pop-up. We're taking it on the basis that there's too many empty shops and we want fewer of them. We don't really care if it's 3 months. If you want to go in and take a 10-year lease, go in and take a 10-year lease. It's about filling spaces, and that top right one was one of those, which was they did go in and take a 10-year lease. Bottom left was in Bridgend, where we just got a load of different craft market traders and put them in one shop, and they act like almost like a mini craft supermarket. She won't mind me saying it, she's given me permission to do it. But in the bottom right, it's also a really cheap way to fail. So the bottom right was somebody we were working with, a student. She really wanted to do a plant shop, and we're thinking, I really don't think this is going to work. She was about to sign a 2-year lease and said, try it in a pop-up and just try it, see if it works. It didn't work, and she was, thank you so much, because I can give you 1 month's notice, walk away. She left owing a few £100. You know, it's not going to sort of bankrupt you. Occasionally, though, you just can't do them. So we generally put people into spaces. Sometimes you can't. This one was too far gone. And so all we could do on this one was just we put film on the windows and backlit it. It was just in such bad condition, but it was still a way of activating that corner at night time. And you can see that little shadow in the window. I didn't dare put video into this, but that sort of moved across the kind of screen, and it gave you sort of a moving thing. And we had it on a timer, so it would turn itself off at midnight every night. So just very quickly in the last minute, then just some of the key challenges. It's massively, unlike any other bit of work we do, it's hugely reliant on behavioural factors because we can't make landlords do anything. Local authorities can, but we can't. We're a private company. So behavioural factors are a big thing. A lot of this is just trying to sell it and convince them of the idea, and that's hard. That's by far the most difficult bit. A lot of the spaces are in quite poor quality. They're not well maintained. They're not looked after. The reason we started off in shopping malls is they generally are looked after and well maintained, but we're now out into other places where a lot of the time they're not great. Big ones are difficult. Those big old Debenhams are expensive, very, very difficult to do. Business rates is not fit for purpose and is not structured. And Welsh Government are completely in agreement with me when I talk to them on this as a local authorities, but it's like trying to turn an oil tanker. Everybody knows it's got to change, but it's not going to change quick. And when we're doing these spaces up, we still have to pay the empty business rates on them because they're classed as being empty, and different local authorities interpret it in different ways. Some give rate relief to non-profits, some don't. Within local authorities, we're usually working with economic development and regen who love the approach, but then maybe their finance department isn't on board with it because they're having to give you rate relief, or the planning department doesn't get it. So often you find that you've got one hand not working with the other hand. In the last 2 years, inflation's been a massive problem for trades because the cost of doing spaces, we could do a pop-up 3 years ago for about 5 grand. You can't now because it's just too expensive. The electrics on its own is probably going to cost you that much, let alone anything else. A big one we found is end user creativity. So it's one thing being entrepreneurial. It's another thing being able to look at a space saying, I might only have this for 3 months. How do I make it work when I've only got a guarantee of 3 months or 6 weeks or whatever it might be? And that's actually, the art sector and the third sector are very good at that. The private sector, small independents, it's a lot harder than it perhaps is in those other two sectors. And then the last two then are sort of outcome focused things. One is that we're reliant on this for local authorities generally don't have their own money for this. So a lot of it's coming from SPF at the moment. And despite SPF being lauded as being much lighter touch than European funding, it is still totally output driven. And actually, it's turning it into tick box exercises. And what that turns you into, that's not the way the world works commercially. It's, you're having to do things at very short timescales. And even though pop-ups themselves are quick, the timescale of when you want to do that property, which is the real problem, one might not fit the window when the funding's available for, and that output-based focus of it makes life quite tricky. And what we're really trying to do is take that longer-term view of outcomes about improved perceptions, reduced, improving footfall, all those sorts of things I said at the beginning. So I've gone through that at 100 miles an hour. There's a huge amount of detail underneath it. I'm more than happy to answer questions at the end of it. If anybody wants to look at what we're doing, we're urbanfoundry.co.uk. You can find all our socials on there, and we'll pick up questions at the end. But I think we're moving straight on now to the next presentation. So I'll stop sharing my screen there. More than happy then to talk to people again at the end of the session.